Hi, my name is Genevieve, and I like to tell true, weird, and terrifying stories of things that have happened in the past. Is it normal to like to do that? No, it probably is not. But you've got to be unique to be number one, baby. So if you like hearing weird and terrifying true stories, then I suggest that you subscribe to my channel and like this video and give some love in the comments below, maybe about what story you'd like to hear next. But today I'm going to tell you all about the Romanov family. Why the Romanov family? Because I am low-key obsessed with this family. You know how people have like things that they nerd out on? And usually it's something semi-normal, like maybe like Dungeons and Dragons or Pokemon or like other nerdy things. I don't know. But one of the things I like to nerd out on is the history of this family in particular. There's just something about them that is so fascinating to me. And I feel like I know them. Like I've done enough reading and research on this family that I feel like weirdly close to them. So when I tell you this story about who they were and how they lived their lives and then what ultimately tragically happened to them, I hope that you will feel like you know them too. Because there's been so much like random mythical things around the Romanov family. Of course, we all know about Anastasia and how Disney picked up that character, turned it into a fake character, and you know, there's just so much hearsay and like folklore around their lives, around their execution and their very tragic murders. And I am here to give you the realist version of what happened to them that I possibly can. So to explain this family, first off, we got to start with the parents. Tsar Nicholas, Princess Alex, who then when she was married became Empress Alexandra. So I don't want to get too deep into like their relationship and how they met and like the politics, the complicated politics around a German princess marrying a Russian Tsar at that time, because it is complicated. Plus they're related on like multiple levels. So there were like all these influences from the British monarchs because Princess Alexandra was Queen Victoria's most favored granddaughter. And then Tsar Nicholas is also related to the British royal family, but in like a different way. So anyway, I don't want to get into all that complicatedness, but know that they were one, truly in love, and two, it was complicated. That's really all you need to know about that. The other thing I'll say about them is that Alexandra, she was considered a very like old bride. Her initial favored match in terms of who, you know, families wanted her to get engaged to was Prince Albert, who was going to be, you know, the British royal monarch at the time. But because she was not in love with him, did not want to do that, she waited until she was older to get married for the time. And the reason I say that is because that trait of like waiting for true love before you get married is passed on to her kids. And in some ways I could say, this is how I feel, if the kids didn't have that, the daughters, if they had just gotten married young, like normal people of that time, they could have avoided actually being executed. So it's just an interesting, sad trait of that family. It was like normally thought of as a good thing to like wait till love to get married, kind of turned into like a bad thing for the kids. So I would argue that because Tsar Nicholas and Alexandra are very idealistic, very romantic, they are very compassionate people, but they're compassionate in the sense that they kind of pity humanity around them. They're very much like ivory tower monarchs. They're very out of touch with what Russia actually needs. And this is, again, like going to lead to their downfall, especially Tsar Nicholas. He was brought up with this belief that, you know, he as the monarch, he really is like this God-ordained thing, and that the monarchy in Russia was meant to be this like idealistic, very romanticized thing that he thought he needed to uphold. And that made him extremely out of touch with what was really going on in Russia, what the actual needs were. But he still was compassionate, and that's what's interesting, is that he wanted to be a really good monarch. He wanted to take care of the people, and he actually thought he was, but he was so misguided and so naive that he just couldn't do that. So anyway, that's them, that's the parents. So now we want to get into the kids, because the kids are my favorite. I feel like we would all be friends with these people if they were alive today. They're like your neighbors that live down the street and you kind of grow up with and you know them. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. I'm just making this up, but that's how I feel about this family. So let's go oldest to youngest. So our oldest daughter is Princess Olga. And obviously it's a huge disappointment that she is born, because they really want a boy right out the gate. Like, it would be awesome if they just made a boy monarch just right then, because that is like the main goal of this family, is to make a boy who can then become the next Tsar. In Russia, girls could not become the Tsar. It just couldn't happen. So if you had a daughter, it's like, cool, I guess we have a princess, but like really that's not the goal. The goal is to make a boy. So Olga's born, they're like, okay, whatever, let's just try again. We'll have, you know, another one. But before I get to the other ones, because there's gonna be 4 girls before they finally get a boy, I just want to talk a little bit about Olga's personality and like who she was, because again, I want you to like know these people so that you really like, I don't know, feel their pain when they're killed. I don't know what's wrong with me, but like, I just want you to know them. So Olga, being the oldest, she was said to be very nice, I guess, but also like very kind of entitled, and she was also by far the moodiest of all the kids. As she got older, she was the most prone to depression, to the point that like she couldn't do like some of the royal things that they like needed her to do. She would like get too moody, too freaked out, and would just like isolate and just be what we would call now depression. At the time, they didn't really know what's going on. They just thought she was weird. So, and yeah, like because she was the oldest, this is my theory about her, because she definitely did have this air of like entitlement and resentment. And I think the resentment probably came from like, you know, it's like she was the oldest. She should have like gotten like the best stuff, but because she was born the wrong sex, she was not treated, I guess, in the way that she thought she should be. But I also, like, I don't want to mislead you, because all these kids are super loved by their parents. So it's not like she wasn't loved or anything like that. She really was. And again, she also wasn't a bad person either. She was a good person. It's just that this like moodiness that she had like made her stand out from the other siblings, that they didn't seem to be quite the way she was. Kind of the gist of Olga. She also was a romantic like her mom. She entered into like a couple failed engagements as she got older, but she just, you know, didn't get married and then died, unfortunately, because of it, maybe. All right, next try. So they've got Olga and they're like, okay, let's have another kid. Let's see what happens here. Hopefully it's a boy. And then no, it's not a boy. They have Tatiana, who is the second oldest, obviously. She is what the Russians at the time considered the most beautiful. And I think that's because she has this very sleek, slender look about her face and about just herself. She looks the most Russian, honestly. All the other kids look a little bit more German and British. They've got that kind of round, rosy-cheeked look like their mom's family. And Tatiana is the only one who really looks like a very sleek, like narrow-faced kind of Russian person. So she was kind of just considered like the most beautiful of the daughters. And what I find most fascinating about Tatiana is that she was said to have the personality of a man, in that where Olga, her older sister, was like very emotional, moody, kind of resentful, threw some tantrums, Tatiana was kind of the opposite of that, where she was very analytical, very logical. Whenever the kids needed to like ask something of their parents, it was said that they would always ask Tatiana to go like talk it over with their dad, because she was the best like debater. She was the best at like kind of like being like a man and having like man conversations. I don't know, it's their words, not mine. But it was kind of this running joke that Tatiana didn't have the personality of a woman, she had the personality of a man. Which makes me think, because I've been doing so many weird theories in my head about like who these people really were beneath the surface. And so sometimes I think maybe Tatiana was like a closeted lesbian. She did not seem interested in getting engaged, like really at all. Like, I guess, I'm assuming she probably had the same romantic notions as the other kids, but like, unlike the other daughters, she's just not as focused on engagement. She doesn't seem like as interested in men. But again, that's just like my own personal theory. I've never heard anyone else say that or talk about Tatiana that way, but just in the way that she's described, I just wonder, maybe she was a lesbian, who knows? All right, next try, they're gonna have another kid. It's like, okay, this is it. We've got 2 daughters now. Surely the third one is gonna be a boy. But no, unfortunately, their third child is Maria, who is my personal favorite daughter. I feel like if I knew these people, Maria would be like the best friend, the one you wanna be closest to, just like the nicest, like the most genuinely nice person of the family. She is like very approachable, very, some would say overly interested in like commoner life. She's just an incredibly heartfelt person, and she relates well to all people and seems to have a genuine interest in all people. Maria is also possibly even more romantic than her oldest sister Olga, in that Maria is like, it's said that all she ever wanted was to get married and just have like a million kids. Like she was like this total romantic. And like I said, definitely the most sweet-natured of all the kids. Her next sibling, which I guess I'll just talk about now, Anastasia, was ironically the kind of hellhound of the group. It's funny to say that because Anastasia is the one that, of course, history has decided to make, only because she's the youngest girl, but they've decided to make Anastasia like the figure of like maybe she lived and she was like a cool princess. But like Anastasia's personality was like arguably like the worst. So when Anastasia was born, obviously she's the 4th, and they are just like over it. Like they are like, oh my gosh, why do we keep having daughters? She is described by her nannies as being like literally the devil incarnate. There is like one nanny like writing about this, about how Anastasia, when they would like play in the snow, Anastasia would make snowballs that had like rocks in them. And she once like seriously injured Olga because she threw this snowball with a freaking rock in it. And Anastasia would do stuff like that all the time. She would break furniture. She would be like just totally up to like crazy antics that were like bordering on like violent. And it's interesting because the way the like family, especially like the family daughter dynamics worked out. So the 2 oldest girls were called the big pair, Olga and Tatiana, and the 2 little girls were called the little pair, Maria and Anastasia. So the big pair were like friends and they hung out, and then the little pair were friends and hung out. And so it was said that Maria was always like chasing after Anastasia, like profusely apologizing for like whatever weird thing she was doing that was like causing a ruckus. And that was just their dynamic. So when you think about which princess do you wish survived, it's like Anastasia's like the last one you want, and yet she's the one that got picked up by Disney. But again, sorry I just spoke so badly about Anastasia, because again, they're all nice kids. Like they all basically have the same family values instilled in them. It just so happened that Anastasia was the most like rabble-rousing, like destructive of the group. But all of them were like well-trained. They all had, of course, like excellent homeschooling and lots of tutors and stuff like that. And so they were all, you know, good kids in that sense. So we've had 4 girls now, and they finally have a 5th kid, and blessed be, it is a son. So Prince Alexei is born, but their joy is cut pretty short because Alexei happens to have hemophilia, which was a disease that was genetically bounced around royal families all over Europe because of all of the inbreeding and the cross lines that were happening within the royal families. And so it was Princess Alex, I should call her Alexandra because she's been married a long time now, but I kind of like the name Princess Alex, which is why I keep referring to her as that. But the mom, she was the main carrier of that gene. And actually both Maria and Alexei had signs of hemophilia, but it was Alexei that had it worse. He had hemophilia B, which is like the way worse version of it. And from like, you know, just weeks after he was born, like when his little umbilical cord thing came off, like they noticed like it just wouldn't stop bleeding. Like this kid won't stop bleeding. But they needed to keep that a secret. So Alexei was like so overly coddled. He was very, like all the kids were very sheltered, but Alexei was like extra sheltered, extra coddled, because Not only did they need to protect him so that he didn't get injured, because if he even got like a bruise or whatever, like he would just bleed out. Like that was what this disease did to people, is they're missing a protein that causes blood clotting. So when they get a cut or a bruise that to like a normal person would not be a big deal, they can just bleed and bleed and bleed and just die. So they needed to keep this a secret because they didn't want the perfect image of having like, you know, a healthy family and the Tsar. They didn't want the future Tsar of Russia. They didn't want it to be known that he had this like horrible disease that could like literally kill him at any minute. So that was tough. But in terms of Alexei's personality and kind of who he was, I mean, he was only 13, he was almost 14 when he unfortunately was murdered. But in terms of his personality, he and Maria actually had very similar personalities, which is so interesting because there's like connections between the two of them, like even to this day, which I'll get to later. But both of them had that like compassionate thing going on that made Maria so sweet and so interested in commoners. Alexei actually had that same thing. It is said that there was a time that his dad, Tsar Nicholas, had brought him to stay on some like army camp for a while, and they lived there for a couple months or something. And it was said that Alexei was just like so interested and like so good at just like talking to the soldiers, and he was so genuinely interested in their lives. But again, it was kind of with this air of pity though, and that's what made, again, this whole family like not as likable as they might have wished. So that is the Romanov family in a nutshell. Again, there's so much that could be said about the intricacies of who they were and their lives. I believe both Olga and Tatiana's diaries are actually published. And so if you want to know more about like the way they were feeling and thinking, you can always look deeper into that. But in a nutshell, that is the family. So now let's fast forward to their unfortunate execution. So Tsar Nicholas had tried to keep control of, you know, absolute control of the monarchy over Russia, failed pretty hard at that, and the Bolshevik uprising succeeded and was taking over. And so eventually Nicholas finally agreed to go into exile, and so he and the family were taken by the Bolsheviks and kind of held captive. Initially, the Bolsheviks agreed to let the Romanov family live, and the Romanov family were saying like, all we want to do is just like live in exile, like we agree we're not going to be the royal family anymore, but just, you know, let us go off and live somewhere else and you guys can have Russia. And initially the Bolsheviks said fine, but we're gonna like watch you for a while. So that's why they held them captive. They were moving them from like different houses and locations. They were kind of nice in that like they let them have, you know, their servants, they let them have their doctor. They always had their doctor with them for poor Alexei because, you know, you never knew when he might need treatment. So now it's July 1918. Side note, who else thinks that 1918 was like the 2020 of the 20th century? Like 1918 was a weird year on so many levels for the 20th century. It really was like the 2020 of that time. So anyway, it's July of 1918. The family is, you know, they're in another random house in like some Russian countryside area. And the family still has supporters, which form this army called the White Army. And the supporters are mostly made up of like family members, or I guess it's kind of funded by their family members. Because remember, they've got royal family members all over the place, mainly in England because they're closely related to the British monarchy, but like all over. And the other monarchs are like kind of like, whoa, like we need to get them out of there. Like this is not good. They've been overthrown and now they're being like held captive by like this crazy communist government. So like, let's try to help them, but like low key, because the other countries' monarchies don't want to get pulled in too deeply and then they get targeted. So it's like low key help. So there's this thing called the White Army that's happening in Russia. And Tsar Nicholas, he's in secret communications with people, and he thinks, or he knows, that this White Army is like coming to like take them so they can finally like flee and like finally live peacefully like somewhere far away from Russia. So July 1918, it's getting tense because they know the army is close. Literally any day now, they're gonna come free us and take us away. So it's like tense. So the night of July 17th, the family is awoken in the middle of the night by the Bolsheviks, and they're told, like, get all your things and go downstairs and wait because you are about to be moved again. And it's thought that Tsar Nicholas was actually relieved by this because he was sure, okay, this must be the White Army. Like, I'm sure, like, we're about to be, like, reconnected to the people that are going to help us. And so there was, like, a little bit of, like, excitement and, like, relief at, like, okay, we're going to be moved to safety this time. So the whole family is taken downstairs. The family, the servants, and the doctor, because remember, they're all together. They're taken downstairs and they're put in like this big great room. And when they get there, Mom Alexandra asks for a couple chairs because, again, Alexei needs to be pampered, and so she wants 2 chairs for Alexei and then also the Tsar Nicholas to be able to sit. So they get the chairs, they come back, and then what's really weird is that the family photographer was also there, and I guess was in on this with the Bolsheviks, in that the photographer was there and started to, like, arrange the family as if they were going to get a portrait taken. So he starts, like, telling them, okay, you stand there, like, okay, Alexei's in the chair, right, you go over here. And it's just very bizarre because the family totally goes along with it. Like, yeah, it's like the middle of the night. We're just going to get our portrait taken, and this is totally normal. Again, a very naive, innocent family. So they're being arranged for this so-called picture that's about to be taken of them. And then in walks the very drunk Bolsheviks, because they have been, like, up pretty much all day, all night up to this point, just, like, drinking vodka, getting ready because they know what they have to do. And so they are wasted, and they come in the room and they read this decree. And the decree basically says, because your people, your White Army people, have been, trying to defy the Bolsheviks by trying to save you, because your family keeps trying to save you, we now have to kill you. So it says that and some other stuff because I don't know word for word what it said, but that was basically the gist. That obviously the Bolsheviks knew of the White Army trying to save them. They'd obviously intervened a couple times in, like, White Army attempts to, like, get them. And they were annoyed, and they were like, you know what, this family, we agreed to keep them in exile and not kill them, but you know what, we're done with that now, it's time to kill them. But it was a really hasty decision, and it was so sloppily carried out. So they read this decree, and then, like, 5 dudes just, like, open fire. But remember, they are in, like, a basement area. They're in this kind of big, like, grand room in, like, this kind of downstairs area. And they have, like, muskets that have, like, smoke and stuff. So they fire. They successfully kill Tsar Nicholas, like, pretty much instantly. They also kill the mom shortly after. It said that the women in the group, like, went to cross themselves, like, right when they were hearing this decree that they were about to be killed. But they opened fire so quickly, like, read the thing, opened fire so quickly that they didn't even have time to finish crossing themselves. But here's the thing, they were so drunk and the room filled up with so much smoke so quickly that after their initial, like, firing of the guns, they looked around the room and saw that only Tsar Nicholas and 2 servants were successfully killed. There were a couple people injured, but the only people that actually died from all this firing of guns inside was, 3 people. So these poor people, especially the kids, ironically, were the hardest to kill. And why were they the hardest to kill? Because they had jewels. They had tons of diamonds and precious gems. All of the royal jewelry had been sewn into their undergarments, which was acting as, like, a little bit of an armor. So whenever they were shot at, the bullet would either, like, not go through at all, or it would just, like, not penetrate very deeply, so they'd be injured, but they wouldn't be killed. So on the next round of firing, they do kill the Tsarina Alexandra, the empress, and they kill the other adults. But again, the poor kids, who are now, like, running around, like, screaming, scratching at the walls, trying to open the back door. The first of the kids that was successfully killed was Alexei, because it was said that when the firing started, he went into freeze mode and he sat in his chair just staring forward, terrified, according to the accounts of the drunken shooters. And so he was killed next. Whereas the daughters, the girls, they were the ones that started running around the room in the smoke, trying to get out, screaming. Also, I should say that the reason we know about this murder and execution in such detail is because the dudes that drunkenly carried it out bragged about it. Like, they wrote all their own little biographies about how it went down, like what all was said and what all was done. And of course, because it's like recounted by, you know, the murderers themselves, there's always, you know, room for maybe some different interpretation, but this is what we have to go off of. So that's what we're doing. So our poor girls who are running around the room, it is also said that two of them, we don't know which two, were kind of found, like, again, because they would shoot and then they would have to stop to let the smoke clear because they couldn't see, like they physically couldn't see at all. So they would like shoot, they'd like assess the situation, like, okay, are they dead yet? Like, frick, no, they're not dead yet. And they'd like try to get the smoke out of the room and then like shoot some more. It's just so messed up. It's like messed up beyond belief, these poor kids. So it was said that two of the girls were like huddled in the corner, like holding on to each other. Then there was another one because there was this back door, you know, trying to get the door open, but all the doors had been, you know, barred shut from the inside and outside. So what they eventually had to do, because they could not kill these young women, is they shot them and bayoneted them in the face. And here's what is so, like, even more messed up about this. So they think, okay, finally we've killed them. We've killed them all. They even killed the dog that was with them. Maria had come into the room, like carrying under her shoulder, her arm, like her little Cocker Spaniel that she loved so much. So the dog's dead too. They're all dead, they think. And they're starting to do, okay, let's carry the bodies out. Let's like get these people out of there. And then it's like almost like freakishly comical, but like not at all, that one of the girls, they think it was Olga, I think, or maybe Maria, I'm not sure. No one really knows because these people didn't even know who the girls were. She apparently moaned and kind of like raises her arms as she's being like kind of carried out. And so then they have to like bayonet her again, like in the chest. So that's what's like weirdly comical about it, is like, why won't these kids die? Like, you think that, like, you know, it shouldn't be that hard for these drunken idiots to kill these people, but it was very hard for them. Sloppy. Super sloppy Bolsheviks. And the sloppiness does not end there. I'm gonna try to wrap this up, but there's just so many weird layers to the story that it's like I have to tell this part. So they obviously have all the bodies. They're like trying to leave, and they say they're gonna go to like this like mine shaft to like, you know, disintegrate the bodies and then like throw them down this mine shaft. And so they get there, they disrobe all of the kids and the adults, and they find all of these diamonds and stuff. So obviously they like take those. It is also said that one of the men had like tried to molest the Empress Alexandra, but that one of the like ranking generals, I don't remember their names because they're all crazy Russian names that I just can't remember, but he said something like, don't molest them. So that, I guess that was kind of nice, but we also don't know if that actually really happened. So anyway, they're naked dead bodies are then covered in this like acid stuff that's supposed to like melt all their flesh and bones, because they wanted there to be like zero trace of these people. But even with this like acid stuff, they fail because they pour it all over all the people, and it does, you know, disintegrate their bodies to some extent, but like not to the extent that they needed to. So anyway, they just throw them down this mine shaft, but then they realize, oh my gosh, this mine shaft is like super shallow. So again, sloppy, drunken Bolsheviks in the middle of the night, they're like, damn, this is way too shallow. This is not gonna work, like 5 feet or whatever it was, like it's not deep enough. So they then dig up the bodies, they go to another site, and they sloppily like dig a grave or something, put them in there, and then they report back to whoever their like higher ranking person is, and that person does not like their second choice of grave. So they go back like the next day or something, dig them up again, and bring them to this other location that ended up being their final resting place until decades later when their bodies were discovered. But here's the part that I just have to add in, is like, so that second grave site where they, you know, tried to bury them, When British officials had gone to like look for the bodies because they were like trying to like find out what had happened to this family, they wanted to know the truth of like, okay, what is going on? So there were these officials that had come in to look for the bodies. So this official finds the grave site and he says it was like a mess. Like in the grass, there's like loose diamonds. Also the dog, the Cocker Spaniel, they just left him there. So it's just this decaying dog in the grass. There's the doctor's glasses are there. So can you just imagine stumbling on that scene of just like how like just sloppy and just like, it's like all this dirt is turned up and there's like literal diamonds and dead dog carcass just like left in the grass that they're just like, screw it. Like we don't even care. Let's just get this done. It's just the worst executed execution that like there ever was. So this is where history starts to turn into a little bit of folklore. So everyone knew in Russia and the world that this family had been executed, but because there were no official remains, that's where all of this like hearsay of like, well, maybe, you know, a daughter survived, or maybe the whole family wasn't killed, maybe some escaped because there were no bodies, there was some hope. So there were a lot of false claims of women coming forward, you know, in the years following saying, oh, I'm Princess Olga, or I'm, you know, Maria, or whatever. And all of them, of course, turned out to be false. It was people just trying to get, you know, fame. And eventually the remains of the family were found, you know, years after this. But the thing was, it wasn't until decades and decades later that science had advanced enough that they could do DNA testing to actually see, were these remains of the Romanov family. The other thing that made people think that maybe a daughter like Anastasia or whoever had survived was that the final grave of this family had been put into two graves. So most of them were all put in one mass grave, but oddly enough, Maria and Alexei were put in a different grave. So when they found the first initial mass grave, it was missing some people. So they were like, oh my gosh, like, you know, there's people missing. So maybe they're still alive, maybe they got away. But unfortunately, it wasn't that far away that they found Alexei and Maria's body. Unfortunately, they didn't know at the time, of course, that that's who they were, but it was in, I believe, 2004. So again, it took forever, decades and decades to do this testing on their DNA of the bones. To definitively say, you know, who these people were. So again, this connection between Alexei and Maria, it was finally like said, okay, these bones are definitely theirs, whereas the other family members and servants and doctor, they had been definitively like said, okay, this is who they were, you know, years before that. But 2004, Alexei and Maria were like identified. And what is so bizarre to me now is that Alexei and Maria are still not buried. I'm not sure if it's like a museum is holding on to them or like some faction of the Russian government, but the rest of the family was canonized in a Catholic cathedral. And for some reason, Maria and Alexei are still not buried. So it's so interesting, isn't it? This weird connection that those were the two that had the hemophilia gene. Those were the two that were objectively like the nicest, like most compassionate of the kids. And then those were the two that were buried together, probably accidentally. And then those were the two that took the longest to identify their remains. And those are the two that are still not buried. So like I said earlier, if the older girls had been married by the time 1918 rolled around, they could have probably avoided this fate. They wouldn't have been living with their parents anymore. They could have potentially survived, which is just pretty fascinating to me. The other thing that fascinates me is that this execution and this murder was a big freaking deal in Europe at that time. Like it kind of changed the way that monarchy in Europe worked, especially for the British monarchy. When the British monarchy saw that the Russians actually had the freaking nerve to execute the Russian royal family, they were like shook, like deeply shook. It was at that time that they finally decided to kind of modernize a little bit, you know, become like we're just the cool Windsors, like we're just like normal, like you guys, like we're not like idealistic royals who think that we should have absolute rule, like no way. I mean, they'd kind of already been that way for a while, but it became even more so after that execution. It was thought that in the 20th century at that time, like Europe had modernized enough that like we were way beyond this, like, let's kill the royals. Like that was something of like, you know, the French Revolution. That wasn't something that happened in 1918 to them, like this very modern time. So the fact that this murder was carried out of the entire sitting Russian family, it was like, it shook the world a bit. Even other Bolsheviks and other Russian supporters of the Bolshevik army were like, whoa, I thought we were gonna let them live. They said they were gonna go peacefully. But because they, guess, wanted to show how powerful they were by killing defenseless children, you know, that poor family had to be murdered. So that is the Romanov family and the Romanov execution in a nutshell. Again, there's like so much more that could be said about not only just the family, but even the execution and all of this burying and reburying and the discovery of the remains and the testing of the remains, and then all of the fake people coming forward saying that they were Princess Olga or they were whoever. Like there's just so much mystique and fantasy around this family, and it really is just such a tragedy. I think that's the reason we're so kind of fascinated by it, is because it was such a weird tragedy of this like idealistic, romanticized family, for them to come to such an end in such a terrible way. So I hope that you liked this video as much as I like talking about the Romanov family. Let me know if you have any questions or other insights in the comments below about this family, and I will see you in my next video.